Island SOS. SOS standing for Sustainable Ocean Strategies. My name is Andreas Rattery, your host for today's presentation. So, Island SOS. This series focuses on sustainable initiatives from island nations around the globe. Each presentation is going to cover a different island and a different topic, and highlight the unique perspective and involvement that islands have in ocean conservation, and showcase the different practices that groups and individuals have undertaken to safeguard their surrounding oceans. BUEI appreciates the generous support of Chubb Bermuda, the exclusive sponsor of this series. Island SOS aligns with Chubb's mission to promote a healthy and sustainable planet, strengthen the resiliency of communities, and protect biodiversity against the effects of climate change. Our first Sustainable Ocean Strategy presentation centers on the Philippines. With over 7,000 islands, the Philippines is the world's second largest archipelago, hosting more species of coral than the United States and Caribbean put together and more than the Great Barrier Reef. Anna Oposa, Executive Director and Chief Mermaid of Save Philippine Seas, joins us today to share the ocean waste management and sustainability initiatives led by her organization. I'd like to welcome Anna to the stage. Hello, Anna.
Hi, Andreas. Thank you for having me, and hi to everyone watching online and in the theater.
Thank you for joining us, Anna. Before we begin your presentation, just have a quick question. And you have such a diverse background. Your interests extend from shark conservation all the way to children's arts education. I'm wondering, among all of your interests, what was it about ocean waste management that made that rise to the top of your priority list and make you want to form an organization around that?
That's a great question. And what inspired me is that all of us produce waste. Just by existing, we produce some kind of waste. So it also makes sense that we're also responsible for whatever waste we produce.
Great. Thanks for that, Anna. And I'll now pass the screen over to you and let you show everyone your presentation.
Great. Thank you. Thank you again for having me again. I am Anna. I am the Executive Director and Chief Mermaid of Save Philippine Seas, which is based, as the name suggests, in the Philippines. So I didn't grow up wanting to be in marine conservation. When I was younger, I was involved in a lot of theater. I was taking voice lessons, dance lessons, teaching theater, performing professionally in theater companies in the Philippines. But I also had this big love for the environment and conservation because I grew up with a dad who pioneered environmental law in the Philippines. So I describe myself as a crazy shark lady. As you heard Andrea say, I do work a lot on sharks. I'm also a waste watcher, a book lover. That's my English major background coming through, and a pun master. And you'll see that in this presentation. So, some of you might have never heard of the Philippines or have no idea where it is. So, this is a world map and it shows you just the general area of where the Philippines is. It has been described as the center of marine biodiversity. And I'm just going to flex a little bit on how diverse our marine life is. Our seas are home to over 3,000 species of fish, and some of them can only be found in the Philippines. We have 5 out of the 7 species of marine turtles. The ninja turtles are not part of these species. And we also have a lot of rare and endangered marine species. In the intro, Andrea said we have over 500 species of corals, and yes, that is more than the US and the Caribbean and the Great Barrier Reef. So I think if there was a documentary to be made about the Philippine seas, it would be called Crazy Rich Oceans. But I have to put a disclaimer. When we talk about how diverse our marine life is, we are the center of marine biodiversity, sure, but we are also the center of marine adversity. And just about anything illegal and destructive, you can find it in the Philippines for sure. And chances are we either started these illegal and destructive activities or we've put our own Filipino spin to it, making it unique, making the practice unique, or enhancing the impacts of it. So obviously, we are affected by climate change. We're always on the list of like the most vulnerable countries to the impacts of climate change. There's a lot of illegal wildlife trade issues, unregulated tourism, and illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing. And one of our biggest problems is marine debris, which is what I'm here to talk about today. In any scientific study about marine debris, we always make headlines. Just last year, there was a paper that said 7 out of the 10 most polluted rivers in the world are in my country. We've been called the third largest dumper of plastics in the ocean. The World Bank, different scientific organizations have also named the Philippines as one of the largest polluters. And in any part of the world, we know that when we throw away something, there actually is no such thing as away. We are certainly making more stuff than we can recycle right now, and the Philippines lacks the infrastructure and political will to manage waste. The infrastructure is particularly a huge gap, considering that we are the second largest archipelago in the world. We have thousands of islands. It's hard to get things to and from different islands, and especially plastic waste, where there's very little value for it right now. But that's changing. We also know that pollution harms marine and terrestrial wildlife. So, this is a huge issue for the Philippines and for the entire world. So I co-founded Save Philippine Seas almost 11 years ago. We're celebrating our 11th anniversary in May this year. And at that time, I had just graduated college. I had no idea what I was going to do, but I thought maybe the social media campaign would be something I could do as a passion project on the side. And it was created out of a response to this major illegal wildlife trade case that hit the news. In the last almost 11 years, our three pillars have been engage, educate, and empower. We engage with different stakeholders, different audiences, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a bit. And we do a lot of education programs. We do a lot of talks like this, we do a lot of workshops. And most importantly, we are most concerned about empowerment. We call our followers citizens and not citizens because we want to remind everyone in the Philippines and all the projects that we work in that whatever we do, the lifestyle choices that we make have an impact on the sea. Whatever we do to our planet or to ourselves, we do to our ocean. And we want people to know what to do or to feel empowered to take action when they face different issues in the environment. So, for the next maybe 20 minutes or so, I will tell you about our Merfolk Manifesto. These are just summarized lessons from our advocacy that we've learned in the last few years. So, first is to use your imagination. As I said earlier, I didn't come from a scientific background. I was an English major, I was an artist, a writer. And I think this has actually been an advantage because it allowed me to not just think out of the box, but really understand that there is no box. I saw an opportunity when I read that the Philippines is the social media capital of the world. I don't know if this is something that we should be proud of or we should be ashamed about, but this study says that the Filipinos spend more time on social media than any other country in the world, than any other citizenship in the world. But to me, this is actually an opportunity. It's an opportunity to ask ourselves, how then can we use social media for social good? So, with Save Philippine Seas, we are a bunch of communicators and artists, and we've come up with a lot of infographics that communicate with our audience. So, Filipinos have this reputation of being romantic, so we came up with infographics called the Waste Free Weddings, encouraging people to produce less waste when it comes to weddings. We've also produced a lot of different infographics on plastic waste, and we tried to use language that people can relate to, that people can understand. Like, for example, going back to Filipinos being romantic, we created this metaphor of plastic and people being a love story, but also a bad romance. Because we are now living in a pandemic and we are still living in a pandemic 2 years later, we were concerned about the volume of plastic waste being produced. So we came up with this set of infographics called Plastics in the Pandemic, putting beside each other our fears and the facts that we know, to the best available science that we have so far. In line with this, also created the Reusers Manual, encouraging people to still use the reusables even if we are living in a pandemic. So, with all of these communication campaigns that we've done, some of the lessons that I've learned is always think about what's important and relevant to the audience. What are the current events and issues that people care about, that people are triggered about? It's also very important to use science based information and fact check obsessively. I think it's become an advantage that I didn't have a science background because I have a tendency to overcompensate and really make sure that what we are putting out is very much anchored to let's say peer reviewed journals and other scientific references. And finally, speak and write in a language that people understand. And when we say people, it's like the non-academic, non-scientific community, because they're the ones that are interested but don't really know where to start and are intimidated by scientific concepts and complicated concepts. In every single SPS project, I am concerned about addressing systems and not symptoms. So, for example, when you look at the example of plastic waste, a straw ending up on the streets or in the sea is a symptom. It's not the big problem. There's a system, a larger system that led to that straw ending up in the environment. So last year we had an opportunity to work with the University of Georgia for this project that they call the Circularity Assessment Protocol, and they have this framework that looks at circularity and waste management as an entire system. And this looks at the community, how a product is made, what is it made out of, how is it used, where it goes after it's thrown, and what kind of waste leaks into the environment. So we did the study for several weeks, and we talked to a lot of people, from street sweepers to local government officials to economists. We looked at what is being sold in supermarkets, what kinds of materials are out there, and this is some of the data that's been produced. We also use this app called the Marine Debris Tracker. It's free. It's co-developed with National Geographic, and it's an app that you can record data, the litter data. So we saw where products are coming from, and we learned that most of the plastics that being produced are actually produced in the Philippines and not imported, which is good information because it means that if we want to do something, the answers are in the local setting. And we also looked at the different kinds of materials. And number one is the multi-layer film, which is like your typical like potato chip packaging or your sachet packaging. So we use this kind of data to make sure that whenever we do recommendations for policy, that it is science-based and coming from local data. So when we look at plastic waste, a lot of the campaigns focus on multinational companies and what we call the plastic producers, those who make fast-moving consumer goods. And what I've learned in recent years is that it's not just good to call out these companies or these government officials, but also to call them in. So, for example, if you had asked me maybe 10 years ago if I would work with the big companies, I would say no. But my mind has changed because I've understood that if we want to make impact on a large scale, on a systemic scale, we have to work with companies. So in the last maybe 5 years, we've worked with Coca-Cola Philippines, we've worked with Mondelez, they produce Cadbury and Oreos, and we've also worked with Nestle and many more. With Coca-Cola specifically, we are empowering community-based and grassroots initiatives that are helping increase waste management collection and plastic waste collection. So that's just an example of how we really need to work with different stakeholders to achieve our goal. Other advocates have different ways of approaching the waste problem, but to me, I've learned so much by listening to people in these companies. I've understood that it's not as like solutions are not as simple as we think they are. It's not just as simple as banning a specific product or redesigning a specific product, but there really has to be an entire system that supports the decisions that we make. Another stakeholder that I personally love working with, and this is probably my favorite stakeholder to work with, are the young people. I started volunteering for environmental issues when I was 18. So I know exactly what it's like to be young, to be inspired, to have all these emotions and not have that kind of support or that have that kind of encouragement from people. So in 2014, Save Philippine Seas started this project called the Sea and Earth Advocates Camp. And our first camp was in 2015. And since then, we've done about 11 of these camps. They're quite small. They're 30 people, but they go through a very intense week. We do experiential learning activities, but most importantly, we send them out into the real world and we make them talk to different business owners, different local government officials on the waste pollution problem. And we make them feel what it's like to start your own campaign and to fail at your own campaign, which is just as important as succeeding. Working with young people has taught me that, we always say youth are leaders of tomorrow, but my experience has shown that youth are actually leaders of today, but they have to be given the right opportunities and the right skills to be able to be leaders of today. With these young people, we have learned to turn education, all the things that we know, all the things that we've learned, into edu-action. So, how have we done that? These young people came up with this campaign called Waste Watchers. It's obviously a play on Weight Watchers, but we wanted to focus on waste. And one of our participants came up with this campaign called Straw Wars. This was in 2015 when single-use plastic straws were the ones the vilified. They're like the poster child for plastic waste. So we came up with Straw Wars Philippines. We helped him create a design for it, and this has been replicated in Malaysia and Borneo, and we also have Defying Gravity. At that time, several years ago, balloon releases and lantern releases were super popular and they would pollute our environment. So we came up with a toolkit to stop these kinds of events. We also came up with this project called Plastic Battle, which addresses the plastic bottles. Even though plastic bottles are highly recyclable, in a lot of places in the Philippines, especially the isolated islands, the small isolated islands that are far flung and hard to get to, there are no recycling facilities and very little waste management infrastructure. So we wanted to reduce plastic bottles at source and encourage business establishments to set up refilling stations. We also have a project called Siyasat. Siyasat in Tagalog means, it's spelled differently. Obviously, we put a C pun there, but it means to investigate or to research. And this is a report card that we created, sort of like a report card that we created that assesses a business's compliance to the waste management policy. So, are they following it? Are they failing at it? What could they do better to make sure that they are complying to the policies that the government has created. So all these materials, the posters, the letters, the presentations, the stickers, the table signs, we've put them all in toolkits, in online toolkits that anyone and everyone can download from our website. Everything is completely free. And sometimes people have told me, why don't you charge for it or why don't you sell it? And I always say, I know what it's like not to have resources. And if we can help people, especially young people, and we can reduce the barriers for them to feel empowered, then we'll do it. So all of these materials are up, they're open source. We even have instructions for you to be able to put your own logo in case you want it to be co-branded with your business. And in the past few years, in the last 6 years that we've been doing Waste Watchers, there's been a lot to celebrate. And it's a lesson that I have had a hard time learning, which is to celebrate our wins. There are the big quantifiable wins. So with Waste Watchers, we've prevented a million water bottles, over 10,000 straws. We've prevented over 20 balloon and lantern releases. Some were super high publicity, media publicity, because they were related to like big event companies or local government celebrations. And we have partnered with over 300 establishments, maybe now about 500. And then there are the not so quantifiable wins that we are still very proud about. We have created a lot of materials that we're proud of, even if it doesn't get a lot of likes. That's not our metric for success, but we do have other metrics like if other organizations have adopted it, if there are schools that use it. SPS is a very small team and we like working with each other. That's not something that everyone can say. And when times are tough, what excites me most is knowing that I'm working with people who are energized and creative and just inspiring to be around. Our projects have also inspired people to make lifestyle changes. We work with different sectors. I always say that Save Philippine Seas is like the Switzerland of NGOs because one day we're meeting with multinational companies and another day we're working with like really hardcore um, nonprofit organizations. We've also been so proud of the participants that we have worked with and seeing them lead in their own communities. In a lot of SPS projects, we provide small grants for them to be able to implement their own activities and to be able to have that opportunity really to lead. And finally, we're very proud that we work closely with the Philippine government and some of our ideas and our recommendations have been integrated in their policies and their programs. So, like I said, Save Philippine Seas has been around for almost 11 years. And in 2011, when it started, it had no staff, no office, we had no budget, and we had Facebook and Twitter and a lot of optimism. Now, entering our 11th year, we're six. So I always joke that that's 600% growth. We have home offices. We've never had our office, and it all kind of worked out when everyone had to work from home because it wasn't such a big change for us. We have a handful of volunteers and project based consultants that we call on when we have bigger projects. We have a very active following on social media. We're active on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And I now describe my kind of optimism as impatient optimism. There's always that desire to do things faster, or to see the impacts of what we're doing faster. But underneath all of those wins, it's been a journey. There have been moments of burnout. I've questioned whether I was doing the right thing. Is this really what I'm supposed to be doing? I've wanted to give up. I've felt lonely in this field, especially being a young woman at that time when environmental work wasn't cool. Now it is, but at that time it was like, oh, she's so weird. Why is she bringing her own bag to the supermarket? There are times when we've almost run out of funding, and sometimes there are days when I don't have motivation, and it has to be my discipline, much of which I learned from theater, kicking in. But also, now that we have survived the 10-year line and that hump, I also am very aware that there is no finish line. One of the biggest policy gaps that we're trying to address is to allow refilling. So in the Philippines and in Southeast Asia, there's a policy directive that doesn't allow refilling for personal care and cosmetics, because of safety and hygiene reasons, which is completely understandable. But knowing how much waste we're producing is also a cause of concern, and we should be reconsidering and reevaluating these policies. So we first submitted this policy in 2019, and 2 years later we're still on it. We're still trying to advocate for it, which has become a lot harder to do in a pandemic. In advocacy work, we take our problems of the ocean seriously, but we never take ourselves seriously. In every single SPS project, there's a lot of laughter, a lot of teasing each other, a lot of making fun of each other out of love and affection. Because when you take yourself too seriously, then that's just downhill. And I think it's natural for island people like us to have that kind of happy, positive disposition. So I'm going to close my presentation by ending with a note of hope. Their hope to me is that North Star, is that strategy. And sometimes people tell me, people, like when I get interviewed, they ask me, do you still have hope for the Philippine seas? And I always say, I wouldn't be doing this if I didn't. I wouldn't be working so hard if I didn't believe that all of this will lead to a better Philippines, a better waste management system, more sharks in the ocean. And it has to be our strategy if we want to see that. And maybe I'm not going to be around to see some of the seeds that we've planted, but it's always so integral to have hope in humanity. And with that, I'm going to close my presentation. We do have time for question and answer, so I hope to have a dialogue with you. But I will end with this note, which is I hope that you learned something from this presentation. And I know that you're here because you're interested in waste management, you're interested in sustainability and marine life and doing something good for your islands. So I hope that you find inspiration and courage to make waves in your own way. Thank you very much, and I look forward to speaking with you. These are also ways that you can connect with Save Philippine Seas. Thank you.
Great, Anna. Thank you for sharing all of that. Just a reminder to those watching online that you can post your questions in the chat, and we are going to turn it over to the audience for questions. Just to kick things off, I'll start with a question. You jokingly mentioned, or maybe not so jokingly mentioned, that in your country you sort of put your own spin on environmental damages. So things that maybe are damaging in some other countries, you do as well in your own, unique ways. I'm
Yeah.
wondering at the same time if there are positive spins that you are able to put on your interactions with the environment. So whether that's through different cultural practices that you found ways to adapt to make them more sustainable, or anything that you would like to speak on in that topic.
Yeah, definitely. I didn't mean to sound like a Debbie Downer earlier, that like we just do negative things. I mean, obviously, there's a lot of cultural spins that we've put. So, for example, just all the puns that we've used, I think it's a very Filipino thing to have wordplay. And I know that that's something that resonates with our culture. There's also a very positive approach to our to our language, to the kinds of taglines that we choose. It's not always like say no to plastics, but like say yes to like a cleaner environment, something like that. So it's about flipping those messages and making them um more relatable to the Filipino audience.
Thank you. Some questions from the audience.
Hi, Anna. What
Hi.
what method has the biggest impact, positive impact, that you find in the field? Is it through the youth, or is it through the government organizations, or the let's say, commercial organizations that you deal with? What do you find has the biggest impact?
Andres, could you repeat the question? I got some parts of it.
Yeah. So of the different sort of strategies that you've used, of those strategies, what are some that really stand out as having a high success rate? If that does that can Yeah.
A high success rate is the approach or the strategy that has always had a high success rate is to make the solutions easy for whoever the stakeholder is. So for example, like the toolkits. If I ask an 18-year-old to create their own campaign, they're gonna have a very hard time, or at least most 18-year-olds would have a hard time developing the branding, the messaging, the materials. But because we've already created it and everything is free, everything is downloadable and even customizable, then that makes it easier. When it comes to working with government, if what I've learned is that if I want them to do something like, let's say, pass a policy, I have to write that policy already and go to the meeting with a draft of the policy and say, this is what will help the situation. And it's happened more than once that the mayor or the senator says, okay, we'll file it or we'll sign it. But how many local government officials or policymakers will take the time to develop it from scratch?
Thank you. We have another question in our audience.
Good afternoon. You are almost 10 years in. In your country, have you taken it at the lowest level and going into the school systems?
So the question, if you didn't hear, Anna, is to what extent have you gone into the school systems in the Philippines with your messaging? Does that capture your question? Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great question. Last year, we had a project with the Department of Education, and it was to develop climate change, climate change adaptation, and disaster risk reduction materials for adolescents. It was 10 to 18 years old, and we worked with public school teachers and our government to do that. And we've also done shorter, so that was probably the biggest one we've done, just because it was with the government. And then we've done some shorter courses, like 1 week courses or just a few day courses for schools, teaching teachers on environmental education. So our project is actually called Earth Education, and that is specific to teachers. This year, we have a proposal to make it bigger and to train more teachers so that the information is sustainable. So that's something that's very exciting. I actually wrote to the government, the Philippine government, like 9 years ago, and I was royally ignored, which is fine. I expected that. And then one of our sea campers, so earlier I talked about the program called the Sea Camp, one of our alumni ended up working for the Department of Education and said, I want SPS to be a partner of the Department of Education. So it's kind of a nice story of how the stars align eventually if you have a clear vision in your head of how you want to work with the government or with partners in general.
And a follow-up question to that.
Also, now, three questions. Question number 2. Question number 3. Have you written your book, first book yet?
The question was if you've written a book about all of these experiences.
No, I have not written a book. I don't know if anyone would be interested to read that book, but no, I have not. Just like articles and talks like this.
My background is customs immigration in prisons 28 years. So my concerns are the prisons. Is Manila your biggest part of your country? I've never been to. What's the largest part of Philippines?
So the question was, what is the largest part of the Philippines? By the amount, the population, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. Where do most people live in the Philippines is the question. She's trying to understand more about just the lay of the land. Yeah.
Sure. So Metro Manila is the capital, and then there's like the larger area called Metro Manila, which is composed, I think, of 16 cities, and that is like the business hub of the entire country. The estimates are always changing, but during the daytime, like during the weekdays, there are like 17 or like 14 to 17 million people going to Metro Manila. So it's very densely populated, very busy, and the traffic is also really bad. But yeah.
My last question. We've been involved with the Philippines for 12 years now. We actually have a church, a second church. And I haven't been there, but my pastor went and set it up, and they were here living in Bermuda, and they went back to the church. Are communities, church religious leaders, and other essential government leaders really involved in what you're trying to do?
So again, the question is, to what extent are religious leaders receptive to this, and government receptive to the information? I think you've spoken definitely about the government. So maybe then specifically any interactions with religious or faith-based institutions.
Yeah, that's a great question. The Philippines is predominantly Catholic. It's about 80% Catholic. So the religious groups have a lot of influence on how people live. Say Philippine Seas per se has not worked directly with religious groups just because we try to remain like apolitical and secular, because that's also one of like funders are concerned about that we remain kind of neutral. And I personally also want to be neutral, just so that in advocacy work, if you're too closely associated with one group, then other groups don't want to work with you. But the closest interaction we've had is in Cebu, which is the island I was born in. There's this celebration where they release balloons. And it's a religious celebration, and they release balloons because they believe that the balloons reach, they're like prayers that reach the heavens. And we wrote to them using the Defying Gravity toolkit. We used some materials from there. And the angle that we wrote is that in the Bible, God says that we have to be stewards of His creation, and by releasing balloons and not it ending up in the ocean, then that's one way we can take care of God's creation. And they didn't respond, but then a few days later, they had a press release that they wouldn't allow balloon releasing anymore, and they haven't since then. So it's finding that connection to the religious teachings that have been very like beneficial.
All right. I want to get to some of the questions that are also coming in online, Anna. And thank you for that response as well. But one of the questions is, what similarities, if any, exist between the way that you engage with individuals and with people on a community level, and also on a corporate level?
That's a great question, and I've never actually like reflected on it. But the first thing that comes to my mind is the art of listening. When I was in theater, we were always taught that acting is reacting. So you have to always be listening to whoever you're talking to. And what I realized in my work is that everyone wants to be listened to. Everyone wants to talk and be heard. So whether it's a street sweeper or a fisherman or the VP, the vice president of a multinational corporation, it's so important to just listen and empathize and try to understand where they're coming from. That's a skill that I feel has made me a very effective advocate. And to treat everyone with the same amount of respect and dignity, regardless of whatever you've read about them. Just always go there with very like always be very polite and kind and listen.
Right. Thank you. Any other questions from the audience? I think we got one.
Anna, good afternoon. I'd like to know, how do you relate to your everyday individual? Because that's a problem I have. They don't seem to have so many other issues that they don't realize that this is an issue of taking care of our island and the ways that we produce it. We have other social issues that we have to deal with. We have so many other things to deal with. So much is on our plate, but they seem not to want to even recycle it. It's difficult for our communities to recycle here, unless it's a mandate. So, and in the Philippines, I know, and you know, economically wise, it's has its challenges and things like that. So I don't know if it's just a higher class that wants to look at other oceans being ruined, but then our lower, say, our everyday individuals also, I try to bring it to them that this is our community, this is your homeland, and that we need to take some pride in that. You know, so what I'm asking is, unless it's a mandate, do you find that it has been mandated from the government down and taught in schools, like you say, it's a mandate to recycle, to realize that this is a problem, not only for us now, but for the future?
Anna, did you catch all of that?
I think so. I think the question is about like how do we make ordinary people care?
Yes,
Mhm.
if,
Yeah.
if it's not mandated by the government.
correct.
Yes.
Okay. That's a really good question, and it's something that I think about a lot. Um, and there's really no one answer to it. What I've learned is we always have to understand what people actually care about. And if they don't care about plastic waste, then they care about something else. Whether it's, for example, like coffee. I love coffee, and I know that like if the temperature of the world gets warmer, I might not be able to have some coffee that I love, or like wine, or so it's about finding what is relevant and important to that person and finding the angle to talk about with them. But outside our personal responsibility, it's also, let's say, the government's or the corporation's responsibility to make behavior changes easier
Mhm.
or incentivizing them. So, for example, encouraging people to bring a reusable bag to the supermarket. One way is to make cool and cute reusable bags that you want to carry. Two, it's providing incentives. Like one supermarket that I go to in the Philippines, they actually have a special line just for people who bring their usable bags. And of course, it's always the shortest line. So then it encourages more people to go. And then there's also the side that, like, if people really don't care, then I personally don't spend my time trying to convince them to, because I'd rather work with the people who are kind of like in the middle, that they care but they don't really know where to start, and that's when you give them the tools. It's not an efficient use of energy to try to like change people's minds if they really don't want to, or they're not open to changing their minds.
Great. Thank you for that, Anna. One more question coming in here off of online. Someone was curious to know what are some practices or strategies that you've seen used in other countries or other island nations that you would hope to bring to the Philippines?
There are so many. When I travel, I always have this like list in my head of like dreams that we could do in the Philippines. So in Europe, there are these reverse vending machines where you can like go to the supermarket, bring your like plastic bottles or your other recyclables, put them in, and then you get like cash, you get like coins in return. We don't have that in the Philippines yet. We also don't have a lot of recycling facilities. It's only this year that the Philippine government and different partners have built these these infrastructure. And another dream is refilling. That's one of the policy advocacy projects that we've been working on. In other countries, you can refill shampoo, soap. Um, there are some home care products that were allowed to refill, but not a lot of companies have done it because it requires a lot of investment and behavior change. But that's also one of my dreams. Imagine all the waste that we would be reducing if we could do refills for a lot of the things that we use.
Great, thanks. And I think there's another one here in the audience, so we'll have one more question and then start closing up.
Hi, Anna. First of all, thank you for staying up so late to entertain us
So
this evening.
quick note: she's actually in New York right now, so
Okay,
not so
okay.
late. Yeah.
Anna, this is not a question. I just really wanted to say kudos. I spent my whole life working on the water and hope to continue. And I've had the pleasure of visiting your beautiful country on a few occasions. And I must say, which is heart-wrenching, seeing your beautiful, beautiful environment and it not just being taken care of. But I wanted to say kudos to your passion, your optimism. I'm so happy to hear that, and I wish you the best. And I hope you continue to bring more people on board now, because protecting our ocean and our world is up to us. As an old Native American expression goes, we don't own the planet, we borrow from our children. Anna, kudos to you, and thank you. I've thoroughly enjoyed your presentation. Thank you.
I
Thank
hope you
you
heard
so
that because
much.
I definitely
Yeah.
can't repeat that. That was great.
Thank you so much. I hope that one day I get to visit your island.
We
I
hope
wish,
so too.
yeah, I wish I could go
Everyone here is cheering and
someday,
saying,
someday.
anytime, anytime. All right, Anna, thank you so much for all of that. Thank you for sharing your story. Thank you for sharing about how Save Philippine Seas has deployed sustainable ocean solutions or strategies in your country. I really hope that this presentation inspires and encourages more discussions like this throughout Bermuda, because I think that's definitely what we need right now.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone.
We unfortunately don't have any more time for questions, but would like to just say thank you as well to Chubb Bermuda, sponsor of BUEI Talks Island SOS series. Join us next month on March 26th at 4 p.m., where the focus shifts to Hawaii, where we will be hearing from Raphael Bergstrom, Executive Director of Sustainable Coastlines Hawaii. I'm Andreas Rattery, and I'll see you next time.